everybody. Welcome to Starting Line Church Online. We are so glad that you are watching wherever you're watching from, whatever time you are watching. We are continuing our series called Possessing the Promise. This series is all about the book of Joshua and really taking a deeper look at how the Israelite nation entered the Promised Land after waiting so long to get there. We realize, though, that this book is actually a continuation of the story of the nation of Israel over time. Last week, the first week, we talked about the transition of leadership from Moses to Joshua. Last week, we saw Joshua's first test as the leader of the Israelites when he sent out the spies to Jericho. Those spies met a woman named Rahab who saved them from Jericho's authorities. And we dove into her incredible faith. This week, we're moving into Joshua chapter 3, and I'm really excited to go through what God has for us today. As we begin, I want you to think, have you ever had a situation in life where you have said to someone, or someone has said to you, how many times? How many times have I asked you to do that? How many times did I tell you that? How many times will it take for you to understand this? There are many times as a high school basketball coach myself that I have to pull a player out of a game because of this very thing. Or I have to call a timeout to have this conversation with the entire team. Typically, this phrase is used in a more negative connotation like that. Maybe we weren't listening. Maybe someone wasn't doing something correctly. Maybe someone did the exact thing that you told them not to do. But what's interesting is that God reminds us of things over and over again, too. We see that really clearly in the story of the Israelites. They were always a hot mess, never remembering what God said or promised them, not listening to what he told them to do. But we sometimes forget that we serve a God who loves reminding us of his goodness and his faithfulness because he's gracious and merciful and kind to his people. Oftentimes, he isn't upset or mad that he's communicating something again. He doesn't look at us and go, how many times, in this angry and condescending tone. We're going to be in Joshua chapter 3, where the spies that were in Jericho have returned, and the plan was for the whole nation of Israel to now head to Jericho and to defeat them and possess the land that God promised them. So they start on their way, and they arrived at the banks of the Jordan River. The nation of Israel was directed to wait at the river's shore, so they made camp there and they lodged there for 3 days. All that time, watching the rushing river and the huge obstacle that stood in their way, asking themselves, how in the world are we going to get across this? It was one thing for a few spies to make their way across, like in Joshua chapter 2, but we were talking now about a whole nation of millions of people lugging all their possessions across it. At the beginning of Joshua 3, we read that the Israelite officers went through the camp, giving instructions to the people that it was time to move. It was time to go. And Israel was told that when they saw the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, they needed to follow after them. What is the Ark of the Covenant? It is not the ark that God told Noah to build to be safe in the flood. The Ark of the Covenant was Israel's most sacred and precious treasure because it was the symbol of God's presence and power with them and guiding them. It was constructed at the same time as the tabernacle, and it was placed in the sanctuary's most sacred room. It was covered in gold, both on the outside and on the inside, with 2 cherubim or angels facing each other on the lid. It was very large. It was a rectangular box about 3 feet by 2 feet, weighing approximately 150 to 200 pounds. So when they say priests carried it, they would do so kind of on their shoulder, and it took a couple different people. And we're told that there were 3 different things that were kept inside the ark. First, the 2 stone tablets that had the 10 commandments on them that Moses received from God. Second, a jar of manna, which was the bread that God miraculously sent from heaven each day when the Israelites wandered in the wilderness. And then 3, Aaron's staff. Aaron led with Moses, but his staff is a symbol of the high priest's authority. So on their journey to Jericho, the Israelite nation is instructed to follow the ark that has all these things in it that represents all this through the Jordan River. And that's where we pick up reading in Joshua 3, verse 4. Since you have never traveled this way before, they will guide you. Stay about half a mile behind them, keeping a clear distance between you and the ark. Make sure you don't come any closer. Then Joshua told the people, purify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do great wonders among you. In the morning, Joshua said to the priests, lift up the ark of the covenant and lead the people across the river. And so they started out and went ahead of the people. So God, he required that they stay a good distance behind the ark. One, because it was a level of respect, respecting the holy nature of the ark and of God's presence. And 2, to make sure that everyone could have a clear view of the ark as they traveled. Because like we said, there were millions of people that were trying to follow this thing. And so they had to be able to see it, to see where they were going. So they're staring at this massive body of water. The priests have the Ark of the Covenant in hand. God has assured them he's going to lead them across the river. And if I'm the nation of Israel right now, I can just say, I am for sure thinking, here we go again. Why is nothing easy around here? We continue reading in verse 7. The Lord told Joshua, today I will begin to make you a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites. They will know that I am with you, just as I was with Moses. Give this command to the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant. When you reach the banks of the Jordan River, take a few steps into the river and then stop there. So the priests, they're ready to lead the people. The people are antsy to get to the promised land. It's right on the other side. They're so close. It's showtime. It's game time. Here we go. And the Lord tells Joshua to command the priests to take a few steps into the river and then stop there. 2 steps into the river and then stop? What does that mean? Right? Hello, God. Like, what kind of plan is that? See, this moment is a moment where God asked Joshua to trust him without an 100% satisfaction guarantee. Instead of giving him the entire playbook of how it was all supposed to go, God says, take 2 steps into the river and then stop. Not 2 steps into the river that was dry and calm, 2 steps into the deep and overflowing water. But like, how in the world are millions of people going to get across simply by the priest taking 2 steps into the river and then stopping? And Joshua says, I have no idea, but I trust in the God who told me to do it, so we're going to do it. And Joshua could step forward in faith because he knew that God proves who he is in what he's already done. God proves who he is in what he's already done. We know Joshua is a leader who was told to be strong and courageous. We know he lives his entire life in submission to God. We know that he has watched God perform all kinds of miracles in the past when the Israelites left Egypt and when they journeyed through the wilderness. But we also know that this is a huge step of faith. He can't see the bigger picture of what God is doing. He doesn't know the outcome. He can't be totally sure what's going to happen. But Joshua had been part of the Israelite nation for a while. He knew what God had already done for them. And because of that, he was able to trust him in the present. He knows that God is walking with them. He believes that God goes before them. So even in this obstacle, Joshua had this general outlook as communicated in how he led the people, that he's not seeing the obstacle as an oppressive trial, but as an opportunity to see God work and do something miraculous. because he's seen him do it before. And God had proved who he is and what he has already done. I don't know about you, but this is real for me. As a follower of Jesus, I have faith. I believe that God is sovereign and good. I know that I can put my hope and my trust in him. But even in the assurance of all of that, the uncertainty and the problems and the obstacles of life are there. And they are daunting. And I assume that Joshua felt this conflict as well. But this moment here is a beautiful visual where we get to see what it looks like to trust God, even when the obstacle is so overwhelming you don't know how you're going to get through it. All you know is that God proves who he is and what he's already done, and sometimes that's all we can cling to. So in taking this big step of faith, he tells the Israelites that the plan that God has given him, and that is where we finish reading in verse 13. The priests will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall. So the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. It was the harvest season, so the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away at a town called Adam, which is near Zerathon. And the water below the point flowed onto the Dead Sea until the riverbed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. Meanwhile, the priests who were carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant stood on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed as the people passed by. They waited there until the whole nation of Israel had crossed the Jordan on dry ground. So God parted the Jordan River for the entire nation of Israel to cross, and we see the miracle that it is even just by the story's practical details. First, this was not a time or a season where the river was reduced to like a little trickle or that was really shallow. Because of the spring rains and the early harvest at this time, the river was swollen. It was overflowing its riverbanks. So God has to move a lot of water to get this job done. Second, we read that God dried the riverbed for the people to walk through safely and easily. I want you to think about what it's like after it gets done raining for a long time. The ground is still wet, it's mushy, you still have to be careful where you walk because it takes time to dry. With this, that'd be like 1,000 times worse. So in saying that the riverbed was dry so the people didn't have to trudge around through the mud and the wet sand was a miracle in and of itself. And what's interesting is that we see a very similar story 40 years before this moment. In Joshua 2:10, we even see that Rahab from last week recalls what happened and talks about how Jericho had heard that the Lord made a path, a dry path for the Israelites through the Red Sea when they left Egypt. When they were traveling out of Egypt, Pharaoh, he changes his mind and he takes off after them, hoping to take them back into slavery. And as he's approaching, God parts the Red Sea in two for the entire nation of Israel to walk through on dry land and escape. And then when everyone crossed, he closed the waters so Pharaoh and the Egyptians could not get through. It feels like to me that the nation of Israel has been here before. Like we've already read this script, and it's true, it's almost the exact same story, minus a few details. But why does this connection matter? How does this relate? It matters because it's a physical representation of God revealing something to his people, again, in the exact same way. God brought the nation of Israel out of Egypt's bondage with a miracle, and then he brought them into the promised land with the same miracle 40 years later. If that doesn't show the magnitude of who God is, I really don't know what does. And I don't want us to miss that he is so gracious to us in this way. When he repeats things to us repeatedly, he speaks to us, even if it's the same truth, over and over again. He doesn't just tell us something one time and never say it again. He doesn't just give us something one time and never give us anything again. He doesn't just do something in our life and say, sorry, you've met your quota. Sometimes God gives us so many signs. He gives us a million examples. He reveals himself over and over again. Even when we are not cooperating or listening, God is in the business of revealing himself to us. Not because he's mad at us or frustrated with us, because he wants to. And we see that because he does the exact same thing here. It doesn't get old for him. And where that is reality, we also have to note that just because all of that is true, we still have a part to play. When we are overwhelmed by and comforted by God's repeated presence and voice, we have to respond. At some point, we have to stop dragging our feet or pretending we don't know what God is saying when we actually do. Joshua and the Israelites, they didn't just wait around for God to do something in their midst. They didn't just wait to move after God did something. They responded before they knew what he was going to do, and we are called to do the same. This summer I took a day away to get out of the rhythm of everyday life and remove myself from the busyness to focus on being with God. No agenda, no plan, nothing to rush back for. It was an amazing day, amazing time of just meeting the Lord and seeking him and his word throughout the day. And there was something that happened to me when I was there where God gave me some very clear direction on something in my life, something I had been processing and praying through for a while. And after it happened, I kind of tried to convince myself that it didn't, or that it wasn't a big deal, or maybe it wasn't from God when I knew that it was. And as I sat there processing and journaling and praying through it, I felt God ask me, Al, how many more times do you want me to say this to you? How many more ways do you want me to show you this? What's it going to take for you to understand? And I didn't feel angry or bothered by my struggle. In fact, I felt the opposite. Because I was reminded that he can repeat himself. And he will repeat himself. In fact, he already had in that specific situation. Because he's a God who shows people who he is all the time. He'll do whatever it takes. So unlike when we ask how many more times, our Father will take every chance he gets to communicate with us what we need. Will it always work out like our passage did here? Will God always play out the exact same scenario for you? No. But I bet if you look closely, he might be revealing the same things to you about himself, about yourself, and about the world around you. So my prayer for us as we leave here is that we would remember that God proves who he is in what he's already done. And that we would cling to those moments when he reveals himself to us, just like the Israelites did, to get us through whatever is coming next. God bless you. We are excited that you're journeying through this with us, and we'll see you next week.